I was standing there, staring at a table smeared with ketchup, chewed food stuck underneath it, and the echo of children laughing still ringing in my ears, when I realized something very important. Some people don't believe customer service. Workers are human. They think we're invisible. They think we're paid to tolerate disrespect. And they think someone else will always clean up their mess. That woman believed all of that, and that belief cost her more than she could imagine. Before we go any further, I want you to do two things. First, hit like and subscribe if you've ever worked a job where people looked down on you just because you were serving them. And second, tell me in the comments where you're watching this video from. Which country, which city, which corner of the world. Because disrespect looks different everywhere, but the feeling it leaves behind is always the same. I was much younger then, early 20s, still believing hard work would always be rewarded. Still thinking kindness came back around if you gave enough of it. I worked as a shift manager at McDonald's in the UK, which sounds official until you live it. In reality, it meant long hours, aching feet, grease in my hair no matter how often I washed it, and smiling through things that slowly chipped away at your dignity. Being a shift manager meant I was responsible for the crew, the customers, the mess, the complaints, the machines, the timing, and somehow, everyone's mood. If someone screamed, I was the shield. If someone cried in the break room, I was the comfort. And if someone destroyed the dining area, it landed on me. Most days, I handled it. I told myself it was temporary, that this wasn't who I was forever, that people were stressed, tired, distracted. I made excuses for them. I always did, until that afternoon. It wasn't even a crazy rush, just the usual background noise of families, teenagers, trays clattering, fry timers beeping. And then she walked in, a woman in her early 30s, hair pulled back tight, face locked into that permanent scowl of someone who's always irritated. She had 3 kids with her, 2 boys and a girl, somewhere between 8 and 13, old enough to know better. All of them. The moment they sat down, something in me tensed. Not panic, not fear, just that quiet warning your body gives you when trouble is nearby. The kids weren't just loud, they were careless, running between tables, knocking chairs, throwing fries on the floor and laughing when people glanced over, kicking the backs of seats, slamming cups down hard enough to spill drinks. And their mother? She saw everything. She sat there scrolling on her phone, occasionally muttering a weak, "Stop it," without even lifting her eyes. The kind of parenting that looks like control from a distance, but is actually complete surrender. I kept glancing over, hoping she'd step in, hoping she'd apologize, hoping she'd do anything that showed awareness of the people around her. But nothing changed. Customers grew uncomfortable. My crew looked at me with that familiar expression that said, "Are we really supposed to tolerate this?" Eventually, they left. No apology, no eye contact, just noise fading as the door swung shut. The entire restaurant felt like it exhaled. And then one of my dining area girls walked up to me. Her shoulders were tight, her lips pressed together. She said, "You might want to get someone to cover me. That table. It's going to take a while." Something in her voice told me this wasn't a normal mess. I told her to go on break. I said I'd take care of it. Partly because it was my responsibility, and partly because I could see how defeated she looked. I didn't want her carrying that frustration with her. When I reached the table, my stomach turned. This wasn't just food left behind. This was destruction. Empty boxes everywhere. Sauce packets ripped open and dragged across the surface. Ketchup, smeared on the wall, not splashed accidentally, but deliberately spread. Little handprints, shapes, attempts at writing. It looked like vandalism disguised as play. Then I bent slightly and saw underneath the table chewed fries, spit out food, pressed and stuck there on purpose. My chest tightened, my jaw clenched. I could feel heat crawling up my neck. This wasn't kids being messy. This was kids being allowed to be cruel. And their mother had watched it all happen without saying a word. I stood there for a moment longer than necessary, breathing slowly, telling myself to calm down, telling myself it was just another shift, just another mess, clean it and move on. That's what I'd always done. And then I noticed something sitting right in the middle of the chaos. A small purse and 4 cinema tickets. And in that moment, everything changed. I didn't move right away. I just stood there, staring at that small purse and the cinema tickets like they were staring back at me. The noise of the restaurant faded into something distant and dull, like I'd gone underwater. My hands were still clenched around the cleaning cloth, knuckles tight, fingers aching. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. This wasn't excitement. This wasn't glee. This was that quiet, dangerous calm that comes right before a decision. You can't undo. I thought about the girl I'd just sent on break. Her tired eyes. The way she already expected to be treated like garbage. I thought about how often people looked through us, not at us. Like we were part of the furniture. Like our time, our effort, our dignity didn't count. And I thought about that mother. Sitting there, watching her kids smear food on walls, letting them spit chewed fries under a table that someone else would have to clean. Teaching them, without words, that consequences were for other people. I could have done the right thing. I could have picked up the purse, set it aside, waited for her to come back, handed it over with a forced smile. I could have been the bigger person. I'd been the bigger person my entire life, but something inside me was exhausted. I looked at the mess again, the ketchup fingerprints, the chewed food, the deliberate destruction. This wasn't a mistake. This was entitlement. And entitlement only survives because someone always fixes it. Slowly, very slowly, I picked up a bin bag. I started clearing the table, not carefully, not delicately. I swept everything into the bag. Empty boxes, sauce packets, half-eaten burgers. Crumpled napkins. I didn't pause when I reached the purse. I didn't hesitate when the cinema tickets slid in with the rest of the trash. They made a soft paper sound as they disappeared, and for a second, I felt my chest tighten. "This is your last chance to stop," a voice in my head whispered. I ignored it. I tied the bag firm and neat, the way I always did. Then I cleared 2 more. Tables nearby, adding their waste in, burying the contents deeper. When the bag was heavy, I dragged it toward the back, my shoes sticking slightly to the floor where soda had spilled earlier. In the kitchen, I tipped in the contents of one of the food waste bins. Old fries, sauces, half-scraped trays. The smell hit immediately. Sour, greasy, overpowering. I fought the instinct to wrinkle my nose. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. Before taking it outside, I marked the bag subtly. Just enough so I'd recognize it later. No one else would notice. It looked exactly like every other trash bag back there. When I pushed through the back door and dumped it into the bin area, the lid slammed shut with a heavy echo. Final. Done. I stood there for a moment longer than necessary, my hand resting on the cold plastic. I felt strange, not proud, not guilty, just steady. About 45 minutes passed. The rush died down. The restaurant grew quieter, the kind of quiet where every footstep sounds louder than it should. I was restocking when I heard the doors fly open. I knew it was her before I even looked. Her voice cut through the air, sharp and frantic. The kids trailed behind her, no longer loud, no longer wild. They looked confused, uneasy. She marched straight up to the counter, eyes darting, face tight with panic. She said she'd left something behind. A purse, cinema tickets, important things. Her tone wasn't polite, it wasn't apologetic. It was accusatory, like we'd taken something from her on purpose. I kept my voice calm, soft, professional. "I'm terribly sorry," I said, tilting my head slightly, sympathetic but distant. The table was in quite a state. There was no way I could have noticed any personal items among the mess. Her eyes narrowed. Her jaw clenched. I continued. "I cleared that area myself. I can show you exactly which bin bag it went into." That's when the anger surfaced. Her voice rose. She demanded I go through it for her. She said it was my responsibility, that we should help customers, that this was unacceptable. I looked at her, really looked at her. The woman who'd watched her kids destroy a public space and walked away without a second thought. And I said very plainly, no, not loudly, not rudely, just firmly. It's not my problem, I added. I reminded her gently that movies start at a specific time, that waiting around for someone else wouldn't help. Then I turned and walked back inside, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I waited. When I stepped back out later, I saw her in the bin area, digging, elbows deep, hands smeared with ketchup and old sauce, bits of half-chewed food clinging to her fingers. The kids stood off to the side, silent, watching. I smiled, bright, cheerful, and in the chirpiest voice I could manage, I said, I'd recommend that in the future, you don't let your kids deliberately make such a mess. I turned around before she could respond, and for the first time in a long time, I felt light. I went back inside, but my body stayed tense, like a wire pulled too tight. I pretended to check stock levels, pretended to wipe a counter that was already clean. But my attention was completely elsewhere. I knew exactly where she was. I could picture it without seeing it. The bin area, the smell, the heat, the humiliation slowly crawling up her skin. There's something people don't understand about revenge. It isn't always loud. It isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet, slow, and forces someone to sit inside the consequences of their own behavior with nowhere to run. That's what this was. Every few seconds, I imagined her hands plunging deeper into the trash, plastic bags sticking to her arms, sauce smearing her skin. The realization sinking in that no one was coming to save her, that no employee was going to rush out and rescue her dignity, because she'd burned that bridge herself. I caught a glimpse through the side window when I walked past, just for a second. Enough to see her hunched over, shoulders tight, moving faster now. Panic does that. It makes people sloppy, desperate. The kids were no longer bouncing or laughing. They stood back, quiet, eyes wide, watching their mother do something they'd never seen before. Dig through garbage. That mattered to me more than anything else, because those kids were learning a lesson their mother never taught them. They were seeing that actions didn't vanish just because you walked away, that someone had to pay for the mess, and sometimes that someone was you. A few minutes later, she stormed back inside. Her hands were red, sticky. She smelled like old fries and ketchup even from a distance. Her face was twisted with fury, but underneath it was something else. Embarrassment, the kind that sits heavy in your chest and burns your ears. She demanded again that we help her. That this was unacceptable, that she was going to complain. Her voice was louder now, drawing attention. A couple of customers glanced over. One woman frowned. Another shook his head slightly. They could see it too. This wasn't a victim. This was someone angry at being held accountable. I stayed calm. Calm is power in moments like that. I told her again that the bag she was looking for was already outside, that she was free to continue searching, that we couldn't delay service for other customers. My tone never changed, not once. That seemed to make her angrier than anything else I could have said. She left again. This time, it took longer. I busied myself with work, but inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Validation. Not because she was suffering, but because I hadn't bent. I hadn't swallowed my feelings. I hadn't apologized for something that wasn't my fault. When she finally returned, her expression had changed. The rage was gone. The panic had softened into defeat. She had the purse, crumpled, dirty, and the cinema tickets were bent and stained, barely recognizable. I knew then that even if she made it to the movie, it wouldn't matter. The experience was already ruined. She didn't look at me. Not once. She grabbed her kids, muttered something under her breath, and left. No complaint, no threat, no final word, just silence. After the doors closed, the restaurant felt different, lighter. Like the air had shifted. One of my crew members glanced at me, eyebrows raised, and I gave the smallest shrug. Nothing needed to be said. Some things don't need explanation. Later that night, when the shift slowed and the lights felt too bright, I replayed the day in my head. I didn't feel guilty. That surprised me. I felt resolved, like I'd finally stopped accepting disrespect as part of the job. Because here's the truth no one tells you. Customer service workers don't need praise, we don't need medals, we just need to be treated like people. And when someone refuses to do that, the consequences shouldn't always land on us. Sometimes, karma needs a little help stepping into the room, and sometimes, the lesson sticks better when it's learned the hard way. That shift ended like any other. Floors mopped, machines cleaned, lights dimmed. I clocked out, tied my hair back, and stepped into the cold evening air. On the surface, everything was normal. But inside me, something had shifted permanently. I kept thinking about her face. Not the anger, not the shouting. The moment that stayed with me was the silence at the end. The way she couldn't look at me. The way her shoulders sagged when she finally accepted that no one was coming to rescue her from the consequences of her own behavior. I replayed it over and over in my head on the bus ride home. The smell of grease still clinging to my clothes. My feet aching. My reflection in the window looking older than I felt. I expected guilt to show up at some point. That's what I'd been trained to feel. Guilt for standing my ground. Guilt for not being endlessly accommodating. Guilt for letting someone else be uncomfortable. But it never came. Instead, I felt calm. That confused me at first. I asked myself, if that made me cruel, if I'd crossed some invisible line, if I'd become the kind of person I hated. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I hadn't created her problem. I'd just refused to absorb it. That distinction mattered more than anything. In customer service, you're taught early that the customer's feelings come first. Their time matters more. Their comfort matters more. Their anger matters more. And slowly, without realizing it, you start shrinking yourself to fit into that expectation. You apologize even when you've done nothing wrong. You smile while being insulted. You accept messes, noise, disrespect, because that's just how it is. That day forced me to confront something uncomfortable. I wasn't angry because of the mess. I was angry because of the assumption behind it. The assumption that someone else's labor was disposable. That someone else's dignity was optional, and that mother had passed that belief directly to her kids. I thought about those children a lot afterward. Not with hatred, with sadness, because kids learn by watching. They don't listen to lectures. They absorb behavior. They saw their mother ignore the chaos she allowed them to create. And then they saw her dig through trash because of it. That image would stick with them far longer than any scolding ever could. Weeks passed, then months. Life moved on. I changed jobs eventually. I grew older, tougher, more selective about where I spent my energy. But that moment stayed with me in quiet ways. It showed up the next time a customer raised their voice at me and expected me to fold. I didn't. It showed up the first time I calmly said, "No, that's not acceptable," without shaking. It showed up every time I chose not to internalize someone else's bad behavior. That day taught me something no training manual ever did. Being kind doesn't mean being passive. Being professional doesn't mean being a doormat. And fairness doesn't require cruelty. Sometimes, fairness just requires stepping aside and letting consequences do their work. I didn't ruin her day. She did. I didn't embarrass her. Her actions did. All I did was refuse to shield her from what she'd allowed to happen. And once I understood that, something inside me hardened in the best possible way. I stopped apologizing for existing in my own workplace. I stopped carrying shame that didn't belong to me. I stopped believing that swallowing disrespect made me a better person. It didn't. It just made me smaller. That day reminded me that dignity is quiet. It doesn't shout. It doesn't threaten. It doesn't beg. It simply stands still and says, "This is as far as you go." And sometimes, that's enough. Years have passed since that shift. Different jobs, different uniforms, different versions of me. But that moment never faded the way most work memories do. It didn't blur or shrink with time. If anything, it sharpened. It became clearer the older I got, because that day wasn't really about a purse, or cinema tickets, or a filthy table. It was about boundaries. When you work in customer service, people tell you it's part of the job. The mess, the attitude, the disrespect. You're expected to absorb it, process it, clean it up, and smile while doing it. And if you don't, you're labeled difficult, unhelpful, unprofessional. But what no one ever explains is how much that costs you over time. You start doubting your right to say no. You start shrinking your reactions. You start believing your discomfort matters less. That mother didn't see me as a person. She saw a role, a function, someone whose job was to erase the evidence of her parenting. Someone whose time and effort were automatic and unlimited. And the moment she realized that wasn't true, her anger exploded. Not because she was wronged, but because she wasn't protected from herself. That's the part that stayed with me, because the most powerful thing I did that day wasn't throwing anything away. It was refusing to fix what I didn't break. I didn't lecture her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shame her in front of her kids. I simply stepped back. And in that space, reality rushed in. People often ask whether I regret it, whether I feel bad, whether I'd do it again. Here's the honest answer. I regret how long it took me to learn that lesson. I regret how many times before that I stayed quiet when I should have stood still. I regret how many messes I cleaned that weren't mine, emotionally and physically. But that day? No, I don't regret that day at all. Because for once, the burden didn't land on the worker. For once, the consequences followed the behavior. For once, the person who created the mess had to feel its weight, and that mattered. I still believe in kindness. I still believe in empathy. I still believe most people are doing the best they can. But kindness without boundaries turns into permission, and empathy without accountability turns into exhaustion. That mother probably tells a different version of that story, one where she was wronged, one where staff were unhelpful, one where the world was unfair to her that day. People like that always rewrite history to protect themselves. But her kids will remember something else. They'll remember watching their mother dig through trash. They'll remember the smell, the stares, the silence. And maybe, just maybe, that memory will pause their hands the next time they're about to smear ketchup on a wall someone else has to clean. If it does, then that moment mattered even more than I realized. So if you're listening to this and you work a job where people talk down to you, dismiss you, or treat you like you're invisible, hear this clearly. You're allowed to have limits. You're allowed to say no. You're allowed to let consequences land where they belong. Standing your ground doesn't make you cruel. It makes you human. And sometimes, the most satisfying revenge isn't loud or dramatic. It's quiet. It's clean. And it teaches a lesson that lasts longer than anger ever could. If this story stayed with you, do me a favor. Hit like and subscribe for more real, emotionally charged stories just like this. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. What country? What city? Let's see how far this story traveled. And while you're there, tell me this one thing. Have you ever watched karma work in real time? Because sometimes, those are the moments we never forget.